Where's the echo coming from?
Seem to stop.
Okay, great. All right. All right. Is there any, this is calling to order the meeting of the Parks, Recreation, Human Services, and Public Safety Committee. It is now 5 o'clock, so we are starting. Is there any public comment?
No, there's not.
Okay. Let's go on to committee business. The first item is item A, approval of the March 8, 2022 minutes.
I move to approve the minutes as written.
And I second that motion. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It is approved unanimously. All right. Oh, also, Lydia Norton is on the committee. Erica Norton is on the committee, and she had a family situation and has asked to be excused, so she is excused from the meeting today. Okay, let's go on to item B, and that is the Northwest Thermal Hydronics LLC retainage release, and that will be presented by
Not Jason.
not by,
Not Jason.
yeah,
Autumn Gressett.
Autumn Gressett. All right, thank you, Autumn.
Good evening,
Go ahead.
Chair, Deputy Mayor, Council President, committee members. The policy question before you this evening is should the City Council accept the project to replace the water heaters at the Federal Way Community Center as complete and authorize staff to release the retainage? I'm happy to answer any questions should there be any.
Any questions? Lydia, you have a question?
Yeah. Do you know how long these last and when the next cycle is for replacement or upgrading?
I'm happy to find the answer for you. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll send an email to you guys with a follow-up.
All right. If there are no other questions, do we have a motion?
I move to forward accepting the water heater replacements at the Federal Way Community Center as complete and authorize staff to release the 2,250 retainage to the April 19, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
And I second that motion. Any discussion? All right. Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Once again, passes unanimously.
Chair
Right.
Walsh?
Yes.
I can maybe answer that question. This is a best guess, but we can expect about 15 to 20 years out of that. That's what we got the first time. And
Okay.
these are going to be better. So we should expect at least 15 years on
Great.
those. But Autumn will follow up.
Okay. So the one we're replacing was the original then?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank
Okay.
you.
Super.
Thank you.
Super. All right. Thank you, Autumn. All right. Next item on the agenda, item C, amendment number 2 to the Pierce Transit Extra Duty Police Services Agreement.
Yes, sir.
And I believe it is it, is it Commander Bunk?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I just
Commander
want to
Bunk.
promote me another level.
All right.
I have 3 items on the agenda tonight, and 2 of them will be very quick. This first one is for the Pierce Transit Extra Duty Police Services. As you most likely know, we have extra duty where we have police officers over there just in the Pierce Transit area, keeping an eye on any issues they may have there. This is simply a bump in the how much we charge them. They pay us 100% back of what our officers do. There's no financial issue with the city whatsoever.
All right. Any questions from the committee or anyone on the council? All right. Do we have a motion?
No, I do have a question.
Oh, a question. Yes, Lydia, go ahead.
So who's responsible if there's any liability type of situation where they're either harmed or harm someone? Is it the city or is it Pierce Transit?
No, it'd be are you saying if one of our officers harmed somebody, it'd fall on the city? Yes.
On the city?
Yes.
While they're performing Pierce Transit
Yeah,
duties?
we're still commissioned Federal Way police officers.
Okay.
All right. Yes.
Thank you, Chair Walsh. So, Commander Bunk, how many incidents on average do we have at the transits?
Not many at all. It's usually a homeless individual that just needs to get moved along. Yeah, they really appreciate our presence.
Sure. Do we anticipate any increase in issues when the system is complete? For example, we'll be the end of the line, and my understanding is that people will get on the light
the
rail
transit. Yes, I'm
and
sorry.
come to the end of the line, and then
I would expect, I don't want to say more incidents, but with having extra people coming down, it could be a pretty big influx. I don't think there's anything we can plan for right now.
Right.
And hopefully the transit cops will have their own folks there.
yeah, I just think we need to anticipate and be prepared. And
Do you know if there's any plans for there to be transit cops? there
I do
later
not,
on?
sir. I do not.
Okay. All right. Okay, very well. Any other questions? All right. Hearing none, do you have a motion?
Sure. I move to forward the proposed amendment to the April 19, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
And I second the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Once again, passes unanimously. All right, and Commander Bunk, your
Yes,
next
sir.
item here, acceptance of the, item D, acceptance of the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs Officer Wellness Program grant funds.
Yes, this is one that I'm personally pretty excited about. This will be grant money given to us by the state and through Wtsc that will allow us to have a mental health professional come in and be able to interact with our officers and civilian staff. Last year, officer deaths, the second ranking reason was suicide. So it was right around 632 cops died last year. 25% of those were self-inflicted. Not to mention suicides, but we also, when you high-stress jobs, you start taking alcohol. You may start getting into drugs. This is going to be the first step that we are able to interact with those officers before that happens. This group also does like Issaquah PD, Redmond PD, Seattle. And the person I'm looking at, his name is Michael Washington. He's a 32-year retired Seattle firefighter and a 23-year Marine with 6 combat tours under his belt. So I believe he'll be warmly received by the officers, and hopefully, and I say this with kind of, we haven't had a suicide in South King County involving an officer in a very, very long time, and this is us trying to get in front of it so that we don't have to have that tragedy here in Federal Way.
All right. Council Member SF Dawson, do
Thank
you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. This is so important, mental health for everyone is critical. My question is, at 18,000, is that what it is?
18,200 if I'm,
Yeah.
yes.
That's part-time?
Oh, it's way part-time,
Way
yes.
part-time.
We're hoping for 4 hours a week on average.
Wow. Okay, so I feel like this is important, and I'm wondering if there's other ways to even increase this funding. It's, because we all recognize the need for these types of services.
My secret overall goal is once I see how well this works, to come to you guys and ask for more money. But I know who I'm going to call first.
All right,
Thank you.
all right,
Thanks for doing
and-
it.
all right. Council President Coach Martin.
And thank you, Councilmember Sefa Dawson. That's exactly what I was going to ask. I had last night I was at an event where I had the privilege of speaking with Governor Kristi Noem from South Dakota, and she said that one of the most important things you can do is to make sure that your officers understand that you are behind them 100% and you've got their back. And I just think that this is one of the ways we show that we have got their back and make sure that they are cared for.
Excellent. Is there,
No.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. Are there any agencies in the state that already do this? And do you know what type of budget that they have for this
Most of them are
program?
doing 8 hours a week. I know that's what Issaquah does. Seattle, I would imagine to be a whole lot more than 8. But yeah, this is kind of a new thing, but lots of departments are doing it to focus on the mental health.
So does an officer need to make an appointment with this person, or will this person just be available as they come in and go?
They will be available for that 4 hours a week. We're going to have different shifts so that they can see the day shift swings and graves guys. And I'm thinking what we may do is actually set up some times that if you want to talk to them, or you want them to do a 30-minute ride along with you just so you can talk. But yeah, we'll have some appointments set up. But just having him roam around and kind of get rid of that mystique of mental health being a real bad thing and something that big bad cops shouldn't focus on. We've got so many new kids coming up. I want to make sure that we can take care of their brains and keep them here for as long as humanly possible.
When my son became a police officer, I wasn't very supportive at first. And so he became a police officer, and he asked me why I didn't support him in the beginning of the process. And I said, well, I didn't want you to go to maybe like a car accident and see really horrible things. And he said, already done that, Mom, and I'm okay. But there's a point at which it isn't okay, and you need to talk to someone, so.
Yep, and we have a peer support program downstairs. It's cops, able to talk to cops, completely confidential, and this will just go hand in hand with the MHP.
I'm glad it's happening, thank you.
Thank you.
Council President Kochmar.
Being from a military background family and seeing, particularly in war, PTSD and how the macho guy just doesn't want to talk about it, keeps it inside. It can fester. It affects not just the person, it affects the family as
Yes.
well.
That's
And,
where divorce rates are extremely high in law enforcement.
I was going to say that, yeah. So I'm very happy we're doing this.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, other than the peer-to-peer program you just mentioned, has there been any other counseling available for officers?
Not per se. We do have the EAP through the city. But I'll tell you, cops are a little nervous to dial a 1-800 number and talk to something that the city's attached to. So this will be 100% confidential. Everybody will know it is, and it may lead to further counseling for them all down the line.
So you think it'll be well received then?
It's going to be interesting because I think I see the old guard cops maybe giving them the cold shoulder, but young kids have been exposed to counseling all their lives. It's really not that big of a deal. Everybody knows somebody in counseling with these younger kids. So I think it will be. He seemed like a really neat guy when I spoke with him, and maybe not at first, but maybe in a couple months, when people start seeing the guy down here all the time, they'll be willing to open up to him.
Great. All right.
And I'm gonna hold you guys to that extra money, by the way.
Councilmember
Well,
Severson.
It's a budget, I'm sorry.
Oh,
It's a budget year, so if you could get a number to us, by September, it would be easier for us.
yeah, and you have a majority of the council here at the moment.
Outstanding. I will start working on that.
Yeah. I do have a comment also. You did talk about EAP, and it's extremely confidential. Staff or anybody in the city has no access to that information. So I hope they're aware of that. But I'm thinking also, you talked about the people who may not receive it well. And so question one is there a way for them to also call in and talk to the person
Yeah.
one-on-one over the
They'll
phone?
they'll have all of his contact information.
Okay, and then the other question would be during that 4-hour time that he or she is here, well, you said he, sorry. Would it be possible for them to offer some kind of, training or workshop, which could then trigger for somebody to say, yeah, I'm experiencing this, therefore I do need additional support?
So downstairs with my peer support program, we also do officer resiliency, and we talk about the triggers and thing that's going on. So it's my group of 10 that are teaching the cops all about that to see, giving them counselors' names. We also have something called Code 4 Northwest, Safe Call Now. There's lots of articles and things around, and being a peer support myself, I've had numerous people come to me and ask me for suggestions on counselors, and we're able to send that way. So I think the biggest bond right now is the peer support, because I've been here for 20 years next week, and people know me. Wow, 20 years. But yeah, this guy, hopefully with his background of being a firefighter, being a Marine, that we'll be able to open up to him, and maybe it'll lead to further counseling.
Thank you.
All
Congratulations on 20 years.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you as well.
Appreciate it, appreciate it.
So it's not an easy time to be in law enforcement.
It's been challenging,
So-
it's been challenging.
All right. Councilmember Seth Dotson, did you have anything more?
No, I
Okay.
just support what Council,
Okay. All right.
Deputy Mayor said about getting it to us.
All right. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I move to forward the WASPC grant agreement to the April 19, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
And I second that motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. All right, and that takes us to, once again, item E, agreement between the Washington Traffic Safety Commission, WTSC, and the Federal Way Police Department to provide grant funding for traffic enforcement.
Yes, the Washington State Traffic Commission this year created what's called a walker/roller grant. They really want police officers to focus on pedestrian violations, people on hoverboards, people on skateboards, to take safety from that aspect of it. This is a $5,000 grant, and it's already being utilized, and it'll be utilized by our traffic unit, and they're just going to focus on Highway 99, Pack Highway, and it goes from Federal Way all the way up through King County, wherever 99 touches is where this grant is. So of the $25,200 of the total grant, we got up to $5,000 of that we're going to use.
All right. Deputy Mayor Honda?
So if someone is jaywalking, you'll stop them and
Yes,
talk to them about not jaywalking?
yes.
Will they be cited, or you just talk to them?
That's going to be up to the officer's discretion. We don't write a lot of jaywalking tickets. I know I haven't throughout my career, so I would imagine it'd be an education side of it.
Because sometimes people jaywalk when there's a sidewalk, a crosswalk 5 feet away, or 10
Yeah.
feet away.
That's, I'm aggravated with the jaywalking that I see. I mean, it's obviously it's a potential tragedy for the jaywalker as well as for somebody
The driver.
the driver that might hit them, a tragedy for that person as well. And so
Yes.
that's a ongoing concern that I've had. Council President Kochmar.
Thank you. So Commander Bunk, I think that sometimes I've wondered, I know we've had adults on bikes with helmets, with backpacks, and I've wondered about them, whether they're dealing. And I would think that some folks on hoverboards or the roller would be a quick getaway for some folks. Are we allowed to check their backpacks when we stop them for,
No,
We can't.
not without consent, no.
no? Amazing.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Just in the description here on the staff report, the third paragraph down, it says, let's see, WTC has identified areas along SR 99, including in Federal Way, where an emphasis on changing the behavior of walkers, rollers, and in parentheses, people riding hoverboards, electric scooters, et cetera, and pedestrians is necessary to improve walker, roller, pedestrian safety. Is there a difference between a walker and a pedestrian? Is that just?
No, I think that's the name of their grant. When we first
Okay.
got it, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek because we thought they wanted us to focus on elderly ladies around Pack Highway.
That's the one, when I was first reading it, that was my first reaction as well, so I was.
Walkers, ladies?
Yeah, like with the
There's
rolling
elderly
one,
men
yeah.
too.
And that's not going to be the focus. That will not be the
Okay.
focus.
So, my question on this, I mean, it's a $5,000 grant, and reading through this, it looks like that the hoops and the reports, how much is with all of the reports and everything, how much is that 5,000 really going to accomplish? And how many hours of police,
And this is me just kind of guessing. You're probably going to get about 500 hours, maybe a little less.
okay, so still a fair number of hours then.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what an officer makes and then times and a half. So, but at least to say 400 hours wouldn't be a misnomer either.
Okay. All right. So very well. When I looked at it, I was just thinking, is it,
It's
Is
tough to
it-
pass up free money, sir.
Yeah, so, all right. Very well. Any other questions?
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
She's first.
go ahead, Lydia.
So my question is, there are some areas where the crosswalks are far apart. So are we considering to address those? Because someone like me, if I were to get off the bus and try to cross, it would be hard for me to walk all the way to a crosswalk and then, make a U-turn and come back. So how's that being addressed? And, or is that something Public Works needs to look into?
That's definitely not in the police realm. That would be Public Works.
Right, so I feel like those two should talk before this is even implemented, because it could be problematic. I mean, expecting people, changing behavior as well, but sometimes it's just necessary that you cross.
And again, that would be part of the education side of it, if officers stop that person to find out what the situation was. Lots of discretion involved.
Yeah, but I feel like it's also important to address that and look at areas that may be highly utilized that way, and see if we could add something.
I'll have my traffic lieutenant look up that.
Okay, thank you so much.
So this will just be strictly Pacific Highway then?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So my question is, if an officer is on this duty, is being paid with this grant, is this the only thing that they'll be doing?
Yes. Generally, there's performance expectations, a certain amount of contacts every hour. I think with the DUI emphasis, they have to have one contact every 20 minutes or something like that. So there is a performance expectation, and then they have to turn that report in, the lieutenant will, to the state.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Now, if there's an emergency during that time, they'd still be able to help
Oh, yes,
respond to
yeah,
other
yeah,
things as
de-
well?
definitely, definitely.
Okay, all right. All right. Councilmember Sefa Dawson, do you have something more? Would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, are they going to be on their bikes then instead of driving?
We hope so.
Okay,
I know we got some more motorcycles coming.
okay.
But yeah, that's high visibility right there on Highway 99, and yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Ready?
Yes.
I move to forward the Wtsc grant agreement to the April 19, 2022 City Council consent agenda for approval.
And I second the motion. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, item F, ordinance reckless use of fentanyl in public spaces. And our staff member, Heidi from the
City Attorney's
City
Office.
Attorney's Office, yes, okay.
Just one moment while I get the presentation going here. I have to go back. Oh, hang on, I didn't share my screen before I started the presentation. Apologies. I clicked you. There you go. Okay, now we're up. Sorry about that. All right, good evening, Chair Walsh, and we have, goodness, a lot of people with titles here tonight. Council President Kochmar and Deputy Mayor Honda, members of the committee, member of the committee. Hopefully you can hear me all right. I'm standing a little far back here so I can actually have use of the tray here. But for the record, I'm Joanna Eide. I'm Assistant City Attorney here with City of Federal Way. I'm here to present a proposed ordinance for you all regarding the reckless use of fentanyl in public places. By way of background, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It's a Schedule II substance. It's usually treated in medical purposes to treat patients with chronic or severe pain following surgery. That is what it was developed for originally. It is very similar to morphine, but it's about 50 to 100 times more potent. Really varies depending upon the actual strength of the drug and the dosage.
Fentanyl has become a very large part of the illicit market just because of its potency and its availability. It's completely synthetic, that contributes to its availability and really cheap to produce. Some illicit drugs, such as heroin or methamphetamine, have been laced with fentanyl to make those experiences for the people taking those more potent, thereby also contributing to higher addiction. So depending on a person's size, their tolerance and usage, just 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which is really similar to about 5 grains of salt, can actually be fatal for an individual. And according to the CDC, synthetic opioids like fentanyl are the primary cause of overdose deaths in the US. And in Washington state, in fact, in 2020, fentanyl overtook meth as the drug that was most involved in overdoses in our state, remains the top cause at this time. So it hasn't really changed. And in fact, I believe the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic have only contributed to its increase. Over the past 2 years, there has been a marked increase of people smoking fentanyl versus ingesting it in other ways, such as taking it in the pill form or even injecting it in some instances. This was information from a study that UW-Medicine actually does. It does a syringe study each year. And this is some of the information they uncovered as part of that effort. Also, according to UW-Medicine, the majority of people dying from overdoses now are smoking drugs rather than injecting them as they have in the past. It's simpler. You don't have to have any needles in order to do it. A lot of people who are smoking are just using a piece of foil in order to light that on fire and then inhale the smoke that is coming from that. This increase in smoking drugs, especially fentanyl, given its potency and high levels of toxicity in our region, has been covered by the media, and accounts from members of the public and transit operators have raised concerns here in the city as well. And for that reason, that brings me here to you today. As mentioned in the staff report, the mayor has requested that staff prepare this ordinance for your consideration. So the proposed ordinance creates a gross misdemeanor offense that is specific for the reckless use of fentanyl in public places. It is punishable by up to 364 days in jail, a $5,000 fine, or a combination of both. So that can be up to those amounts in either or. And that's the standard penalties that are associated with a gross misdemeanor crime. But the actions are the next bullets here that you'll see before you. For intentionally combusting, so remember we have a lot of different parameters that we have around the possession and consumption of drugs at this point, so this does follow that as well, the knowledge element that needs to be established. So intentionally combusting or exhaling the smoke of a substance the person knew or reasonably should know contains or is contaminated with fentanyl. The substance smoked is confirmed to be fentanyl, either through a field test such as a NIC test or by lab testing with like the state toxicology lab, for instance. And the substance is smoked in a public place within 10 feet of another person or in an enclosed public place with another person. And for the purposes of this ordinance, we do define what a public place is, just so we can create some more direction as this is potentially enforced out in the public. So for the purpose of this ordinance, public space includes but is not limited to public conveyances, parks, transit stops, and other places that are open to the public, so where the public is welcome to be. The ordinance is based upon reckless endangerment, very similar to the legal theory of that, and that is our state law. And using fentanyl in a way that results in the secondhand exposure of innocent bystanders, so general public people, is such a high-risk behavior that no reasonable person would do it. And the knowledge of fentanyl out there in the world these days is pretty high. I think a lot of people understand what it is and how dangerous it is. So hence the reason for that last statement especially. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about it. Of course, you have the draft proposed ordinance in your packets as well as the staff report. I will attempt to be as comprehensive as possible in my answers for you.
right, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Councilmember Asefa Dawson.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation and the educational component of your presentation. My question is around the 365 days in jail and/or $5,000. So to me, this is going to affect people experiencing homelessness if they are using, basically because everybody else can go home and use, right? So $5,000 and/or that long term in jail is going to adversely impact that population. So how are we going to address that or look at it? I'm not condoning, but my concern is how it's going to impact them more so than anybody else within our city or our population, or anywhere else for that matter.
Thank you for that question. So, of course, first off, the elements of the offense would first have to be established in order for it to even be cited against an individual, for them to be arrested for it. The reason for that penalty level being set at that amount, and remember, it's up to. So it's up to 364 days in jail, up to $5,000 fine, up to a combination of both of those maximum amounts. That sentencing is generally discretionary on the part of the judge if a person is found to be guilty of that offense. So there's a lot of things that need to happen before that. The first thing, which I won't get too far into because I'm not in the enforcement side of things, but the first thing is officer discretion, and of course there's going to be several different factors that need to be established before somebody can even be cited for this behavior. So this isn't going to be just generally people out and about doing this kind of activity all of the time. But this ordinance will be available if this does occur. So there are a lot of different ways in which discretion becomes part of this scenario. I believe a person's circumstances and ability to pay starts to be factored in somewhat with the courts, but again, that is something that the judge would be determining at sentencing. That is not something that this ordinance would be contemplating, and there's a good reason for that. So everything needs to be separate. So.
Council President Kochmar.
Thank you, Ms. Heidi. I'm trying to understand, so how this works. So there's a piece of tinfoil, and they're smoking something that's probably not pure fentanyl. So what is it that would have fentanyl in it that they're smoking?
It would really depend upon what it is, but usually, and I'm not an expert in this arena either, but from my research, I understand that it is, generally speaking, tablet form. There's many blue pills that are out there floating around the illicit market that are readily available for folks to purchase from their general, I don't know, peddlers of these sorts of substances. But usually it would be tablet form that they would be smoking. They would crush it up and then smoke it, because obviously you can't really do that with a pill that's coated. But there's also instances where fentanyl is laced into something. That would be, heroin. That would be, it has even been found in marijuana as well. Not in the regulated market, but in the illicit market. It's been found to be combined with meth. Not a super big expert on how those drugs are all ingested, but there are various ways that you can do it, many of which involve smoking.
Mm-hmm. So the key really is if the person knows that it has been laced with fentanyl.
So they do have to have that knowledge if they know or they reasonably should know. Mm-hmm. So and again, this is going to this is kind of getting into like details and things that would be really important to trial if a person is cited with this. But if there is some knowledge that many illicit drugs are also laced with fentanyl in order to make them more potent, is it reasonable that a person should know that there may be fentanyl present in whatever substance they're smoking?
Sure. So I've always, Commander Bunk just said something that I've been wondering about, which is, if we can't search a backpack because we need their permission, what legislative law was passed that prevented the search of the backpack?
So,
is that reasonable suspicion or probable cause?
So yeah, there's a couple different factors that come into that.
1054?
So there's reasonable suspicion that's required for certain searches and seizures, and this is actually a constitutional thing. as well. So a person, it's our Fourth Amendment, unlawful search and seizure, it's the protections against those. An officer has to have first reasonable suspicion to be able to even get so far along those lines to be able to start the path towards being able to search something. If they have probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed, in that instance, the person would be subject to arrest. And there are search warrant requirements. If an officer has the time to be able to get a warrant, usually that is what they are going to do. But there are some exceptions to that requirement too. So without getting into too many details, and I don't want to speak too far out of turn, those are some enforcement questions as well.
Deputy Mayor Honda.
Thank you. So I have a list of questions. First of all, are there any other jurisdictions that have an ordinance like this in the state of Washington that you know of?
I actually didn't include that in my search. I'm not sure if there are yet. I would have to do some checking around.
So does an officer actually have to see the person smoking?
Potentially. That could be a way that an officer would be able to establish one of those elements. Another would be if a person were to witness it, report it to the police follow-up investigation, they're able to identify that individual. That individual happens to have residue of that substance on their person. If there's the ability for the officer to actually seize that substance at that time, again, these are all hypothetical situations, right? So say that there are all of the things established for that officer to be able to engage in that activity, then they would then need to test that substance, confirm that it had fentanyl in it, and then the person could be cited for this activity. They would have to establish each element of that, of the offense, and that's going back to those bullet points that I mentioned earlier. So that would be part of that investigation that would occur.
So how long does it take for a test to be done to see if there's fentanyl in whatever they're smoking?
That really varies. So it depends upon what type of testing equipment is being used. If there's a NIC test out in the field, that result comes back fairly quickly. State toxicology lab takes much more time. That I don't have exact figures on, so I can follow up with you if you like. And I'm not sure if Commander Bunk has any ideas as to generally how long that takes, but I know it does take a bit of time before something like that could actually come back with a result. The other issue is, of course, the danger of fentanyl and handling that substance, wanting to make sure that officer safety is, of course, kept in mind. So that would really depend upon how the police department wanted to handle that, whether they would be okay with NIC testing in the field, or if that's something that, nope, we're not going to do that. We're going to package it up and send it off to the state toxicology lab and have the results back.
So they'd still have to touch it if they're going to package it up and send it off to the state?
Correct. They would be wearing
So-
PPE for that.
Okay. So let's say someone is, so I initially brought this up to the mayor a while ago, asking if there was something we could do for people smoking on buses and making passengers and bus drivers sick. And he didn't say much about it. And then a few weeks later, he talked about doing this. So if someone is smoking on the bus and it's not marijuana, or which has a horrible smell by itself, does fentanyl have a different smell if fentanyl is mixed in?
That I don't know if it would be able to be identified if someone's smoking a substance that's been laced with it. I'm not sure they could pick that out. I think fentanyl is rather stinky, but I don't really know what it smells like. I will say there is already rules against smoking anything
Right.
on a bus, right? So there is certainly that as an avenue for the transit operators, or for, to report that in as well if they can't handle it another way. But as far as I don't have that what does fentanyl smell like specifically, and I'm not sure whether or not it could be picked out. Like if it was marijuana that was laced with fentanyl, for instance.
So let's say there's a bus coming into Federal Way, someone calls in, a passenger calls in and says someone's smoking something in the back of the bus. And we have an officer who's on patrol at the transit center and they enter the bus. They're not gonna know then right away that it's fentanyl unless they test it, and it's very possible that our officers aren't going to do the testing there, that they're gonna send it off. So then you have someone who is potentially going to be cited for smoking fentanyl in a public spot, but you're gonna have to let them go because you don't have the proof. So what are the chances of finding that person later on?
That I couldn't answer for you. That would probably be a better question for the police department. There are definitely challenges, as I can imagine, associated with locating that person after the fact. I think it really depends upon a number of factors based upon how much information the police officer that it's responding is able to gather at that time. There's surveillance camera footage that they would be able to use, but I don't know how well that would help in the situation of trying to locate the person after the fact. So it's an excellent question, and sadly something I don't have an answer for you immediately, but I'm sure we could check in with the police department on that.
Should we not even have fentanyl in it, just that if you're smoking something that's an illegal substance? Why is it as specific as fentanyl? Because I realize fentanyl is deadly. I understand that. And I realize it can make other people sick. But if it's gonna be a difficult thing to actually enforce and to make a citation, because you have to test to see if the fentanyl's in there, and it's gonna be sent away most likely to the state lab, which is gonna take, it's not gonna be a priority for them to test it, I'm sure. Should the ordinance just address smoking any drug?
Illegal drugs.
Yeah.
So that's a very good question. The problem is that this ordinance is constructed following the same legal theory as reckless endangerment, the crime from state law. And in order for a person to be found guilty of reckless endangerment, there has to be a risk or an actual occurrence of serious injury or death of another person by the activity that person is engaging in. The reason why fentanyl is focused on in this is because of its potency level, its toxicity in very small amounts to another individual, or to the person consuming it, to be completely honest. So that is part of the reason why we have to focus on that as far as the activity is concerned. There hasn't been as much, if we could establish that another substance could potentially cause a serious risk of serious physical injury or death to another person by them being exposed to it secondhand, then potentially this would be a good framework for something like that. But the question initially was, what can we do about potential secondhand exposure of fentanyl in a public place? And so this is the result of that. I think it really is challenging to determine, the serious risk of physical injury or death to another person when you're talking about something like marijuana. And then also there's other smoking laws out on the books too that we have to be mindful of as well. So.
I have some concerns with this. I have a lot of concerns with this because I don't want to have something on the books that we're not going to be able to enforce. And I have concerns that we're not going to be able to enforce this. So.
I can say that it was constructed to be enforceable given the elements of the offense that were written into the ordinance and the way it follows the legal theory of reckless endangerment, the state crime. Now, whether or not it will be something where the occurrence, the behavior would occur out in public for it to be enforced against a person, that's the question. I think, but if it were, then this ordinance would be available for consideration for use.
When you come back to present this to the full council, I would like to have perhaps the police chief or someone from the police department who can actually let us know if how they're going to, what they're going to do with this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Is it not?
Thanks very much.
Councilmember Seth Dawson, did you have another question?
I do, but I think Deputy Mayor Honda addressed it in a different way, but one more question to that, and I totally agree with what she's saying, and that was going to be my comment. I don't know how I'm going to support this. First of all, we're adding more work to our police force, and you have all these ifs and all these conditions that have to be met to where I don't understand why we're even doing it. And also, who is gonna foot the bill when it's being sent to a lab? And if backpacks cannot be checked unless you have what is it,
Warrant?
warrant?
Well,
Or what? So there's all these things where one place we're saying, no, we can't look at their backpack because there's no warrant, and then here we're saying, oh, we need to, see if there's, if they're possessing it, or even when they're using it. So I have too many questions, but the cost also is another one that I would like to add to this ordinance. But right now, it's hard, it's absolutely hard for me to support. In particular, like what I said, I'm gonna assume it's people who don't have a place to live, so how are they gonna be identified and located later, whether it be weeks that it takes? And how do we know that if I'm exposed, when does it even show up to where I'm impacted by secondhand exposure, right? Because it might take, I don't know, I mean, I don't know. So there's so many unknowns. Even when you present it to full council, I don't know if it's going to be, I don't know how different it's going to be to where we're going to support it, but I personally do have a lot of unanswered questions, and I have problem with this ordinance as a whole.
so I
Thank you,
want,
though.
of course, I would like to address one thing. I'm not sure if I caught your question or not, but addressing the searching of backpacks. When I'm saying there are a lot of conditions that have to be present in order for someone to have their backpack searched, we can't just do a stop and frisk of somebody randomly out in public because you have a backpack, right?
Right.
There has to be something more. There is an entire spectrum of things that can need to occur or can occur in order for a person's backpack to be searched. If the person is actively committing a crime, and something is happening to where an officer needs to secure that backpack for officer safety purposes and for public safety purposes, there's a lot of different things that are going to factor in. So I want us to bear that in mind for sure. As far as the questions about costs for testing, that would be something that would be borne by the enforcement authority, by the city, because we would be the ones prosecuting, if you will, that offense. I don't know if I got all of your questions, but hopefully we can.
Cost is one, but the rest I'm supporting what Deputy Mayor was saying. And again, my concern is we are, like I said earlier, who does it adversely impact? And then how are we addressing it? Because if they don't have an address, regardless of what you do, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the road, it's not gonna, if they're not found next time, then it's mute. It doesn't matter. But then also, if I'm exposed, then how do I know I've been exposed?
Okay.
Right?
So that is going to vary person to person. And it's also going to vary about the amount of fentanyl the person had and the amount that was blown out into the air. I mean, if it's something that is a very high level, then your impacts might be immediate. And you would know that something is wrong. If it's something that's of a lower amount, it might be a little bit later in time. That is another variable. But this ordinance is kind of, it's really agnostic to that. It's if you are within a certain amount of feet from a person or within an enclosed place of another person, with another person, that activity, the smoking of fentanyl, is deemed to be so dangerous and so risky so that no reasonable person would engage in that. So it doesn't matter if actual harm happens to that other person. It matters whether there's risk of substantial bodily harm or potentially death to that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just the duration also that could harm me, right, at some point. But, okay, yeah, it
Potentially.
does make sense, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's all these potential and all these unknowns. And so if the person's, if I see them, let's say right now, they're smoking out there and I suspect, can I call the police on them? Or does it matter because they're not near an individual? They're out there by themselves and I just happen to notice or witness as I'm driving by?
For
Would that
this,
matter?
for this ordinance, not necessarily. It wouldn't necessarily fit those elements, but I mean, anytime you are witnessing something you believe to be a crime in progress, absolutely, I don't want to tell you not to call the police, you should. But it really, again, depends upon the situation, but this ordinance probably wouldn't reach that behavior because of, well, I'm not sure if I know the hypothetical, but, so,
Okay.
I'll leave it there.
Right. I have a few questions. Kind of going back to the testing, you mentioned, is it a NIC test that can be done on site? Do our officers generally have those available, or what's the situation there? And what is the cost of those?
So I don't necessarily know the cost offhand. Commander Buck, I don't know if you know that information, but I do know our officers are equipped with NIC tests. Whether or not they are equipped with the capacity to test for fentanyl at this time, I'm not sure. I think they are, but I don't know if that's something that our officers would regularly do. They may be, putting on PPE and packaging it up. And I do want to be clear, anytime handling substances you're not quite sure, our officer safety is paramount. So PPE would be
Right.
important in every
Yeah.
instance, but I don't know if you have that
We
information.
Googled it this morning. So the test for fentanyl is a 6-part test, NIC test kit. Each one looked like they were about $150 to $200 for each 6-part. But we are trained not to field test something that we believe is fentanyl. We send it to the state lab, and like she was saying, there's a pretty good backup, and I really don't have that, how big of a delay that would be, but it's probably up to a year.
A year?
Yeah.
I think it really depends. I'm not entirely certain, because they have different people doing different tests for different things. So I'm not sure. It can be up to a year, but again, that's kind of a sliding scale, right? So that we would have to check into.
Higher priority cases would definitely take precedence at the state lab. So something that's just a gross, I don't want to say just a gross misdemeanor, but a lower level crime may not get the attention that an active homicide investigation would.
Right.
And along with that, or kind of going with that, is what we were talking about, backpacks. Suppose there's somebody who was smoking a substance that fit this description that would be a possible violation of this ordinance, and they had a backpack with them. Would that provide the reasonable suspicion needed to be able to get a warrant to search the backpack?
I would need a nexus to prove that, let's say you're the witness and you saw him put a drug-related thing inside the backpack.
Or pull it out.
Yeah, then I could seize the backpack, write that warrant, and be able to do the search.
Okay,
there.
all right, so that would be a realistic thing then, if
Yes, sir.
okay. Personally, I think that they should go before the full council, and determine it at that point. How much it would be used, I have questions about. I'm kind of a little bit concerned that it should have a little wider scope. One of it being a member of the business community and talking to other business owners, and with my own shop, I have had people smoking substances that was not marijuana in the restrooms in the shop. They were by themselves. However, I had an employee go in afterwards, and she ended up going home sick because of almost immediately feeling ill because of what was in there. As far as I know, she's had no long-term problems from it, but she went home sick that night because of it. And this ordinance would not be covering that, it doesn't sound like, because she wasn't in there in the enclosed area at the same time that it was being consumed. However, it is still, it was a hazard for her. And it seems to me as though the spaces where this should be enforceable would be in, for example, in the restroom of a business, where there is a very realistic danger that an employee or another customer would be going in there and being exposed immediately. Is it so that we could modify the ordinance that could be covered, or would that be realistic?
So I believe as it stands, the ordinance itself, so long as it was a public restroom, meaning it's open to the public, you're inviting the public into your establishment, right? And if your restroom is available for use for members of the public, then it could be considered a public restroom, and then this ordinance could extend to it. Now, whether or not...
The 10-foot thing, though.
Well,
that.
So remember, it's 10 feet, within 10 feet of a person in an unenclosed place. And with another person in an enclosed public place. Now, how that operates with the enclosure is another question, but it has to deal with nexus and proximity, right, of another individual. So I think that those are things that would have to play into an evaluation as to whether or not the person would be cited, if the person could be located in the example that you're providing. And then ultimately a question for the prosecutor and for the judge.
Could the ordinance be modified some in order to make it more clear that that would be applicable?
I would have to take a look at it and maybe understand a little bit more about the location you're describing for me to be able to know for certain whether or not this ordinance would extend to it. Like, is it a single stall, with a door that nobody else can go into, or is it multiple stalls or something along those lines?
And the specific case that I referenced, it's a single stall restroom.
Okay.
And so, the employee went in immediately
So this is
afterwards.
an after the fact, okay.
After the fact, immediately after the fact, and sometimes, often, could be other customers waiting to enter. And so it could be a situation with a customer or an employee that would be providing a realistic hazard for them.
That's something that I would have to look into and think about a little bit. I don't have an answer for you right here on the fly.
Right. I definitely think that this should go before the full council and be considered by the full council. And then at that time, the different council members can make their own determination at that point.
Chair, you can forward it to the full council without a recommendation? This committee, you two can do that?
Okay.
When you're done, I have some questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Council President Honda, or Deputy Mayor Honda.
So how does this, in Washington State, a person can have a personal amount of drugs on their person? How does this affect that? This
doesn't extend to the possession of the drugs. It extends to the specific behavior of smoking it within that proximity of another person. It's completely, it doesn't reach the actual possession of that substance to begin with, which is still, they are illegal substances to have. They are illicit substances to have. It's just we don't have the ability to prosecute that. We don't have the ability to cite a person for that activity, just that simple possession. This is focused on the activity of smoking that substance and the danger that it poses to other people in the public.
So if a person is inside smoking something that's laced with fentanyl, they don't have to be 10 feet apart. They can be, is that correct?
Let me read specifically from here. It says, So the specific element that I'm referring to is does so while in a public space and within 10 feet of another person, or while inside an enclosed public space with another person. So if they're within that enclosed place with another person. So this is looking at, okay, is somebody sitting on a bus with another person? Is somebody in another room with a person? Is somebody in another type of enclosure such as a public restroom in a park with another person? Those sorts of things, that would be covered by the enclosed space. Now, getting down to splicing hairs and things like that, like, it's really gonna depend upon the situation, the circumstances of that enclosed space, as to whether or not the person would be able to be cited with this,
So
and ultimately a successful prosecution.
does so while in a public space and within 10 feet of another person, or while inside an enclosed public space with another person. So I don't mean to be really nitpicky here, but you can, if someone is smoking something laced with fentanyl and I'm 10.5 feet away from that person, I'm not going to have any effects from that? I mean, why do we have 10 feet in here anyway? Do we need 10 feet in here?
So 10 feet is a measurable distance at which a person is likely to have more, I think about this in this way. If you smell cigarettes or cigarette smoke, generally that is, well, at least everything I've been taught. If you can smell it, you're being exposed to it. But at what level of closeness are you going to be at to that person to where it's going to be potentially more dangerous? So that 10 feet is a measurable amount of saying this point as at which we believe the risks to be higher. And we're going to say this is the point at which we're going to measure if, for instance, I'm standing outside in front of the City Hall with Commander Bunk, and somebody is standing 10 feet away from us or 8 feet away from us and smoking fentanyl, they would potentially be cited with this.
Is there scientific proof that says 10 feet is the magic number?
So this is kind of taken from a combination of different things. We have our, everybody knows the social distancing, 6 feet distance sort of thing from COVID. We also have 25 feet away for smoking cigarettes. So this is kind of finding a place in the middle to where we believe that the effects could be rising to the level of the serious risk of physical injury or death.
I really appreciate all the work you put into this. What I'm trying to figure out is if it's enforceable, if we would ever cite anyone, if anyone would ever actually go to court over this, and
It's really going to be a fact-dependent type of situation, very much so. And each scenario is going to be different. We could come up with a million different hypotheticals tonight and think about that and think about, okay, well, what about this and what about that? There are some instances in which it won't be appropriate for a person to be cited. If someone's standing across the parking lot smoking fentanyl, is that going to be an instance at which, and nobody's around them, is that going to be falling within the purview of this? No, it's not. But if it is an activity that we believe is so risky and we believe is going to mean such a risk to another individual, and coming up with some of the enclosed areas, like we're talking about somewhere that you can't kind of get away from, right? You can't help but be exposed to that substance. Then that is what this ordinance is focused on.
all right, thank you.
I'll go on to you in just a second, Lydia, but first, with that, where it says, or while inside an enclosed public space with another person, would it be reasonable to add to that, while inside an enclosed public space with another person, or where another person can reasonably be expected to enter?
I would have, I'd have to take a look at it, but I'll take a note of that and think about it a little before I can say yes, no, maybe, or anything else.
All right. Okay. Councilmember Seth Dawson.
Yeah, actually, we do need to go ahead and make this motion, so it goes to,
Yeah.
counsel
Did you
anyway,
have
no
another
matter what.
question first,
But
or-
yeah, I think we've said it, but my other question then would be, someone like me, we don't know the difference between fentanyl or anything that's being smoked, you know. And so how are they gonna determine it's even that? Because, and is that the only substance that they're looking for in order to cite this individual?
Are you talking about the officer or?
The officer or anybody who calls?
So there are, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but so there are different behaviors, materials, things that, evidence that can contribute to an officer having the reasonable suspicion that in fact that this is fentanyl, or this is heroin, or this is methamphetamine. Anything like that that would be contributing fact or evidence to help the officer establish they believe that this is fentanyl, for them to continue the investigation further so they can do that testing, right? If they are able to do so.
So why not focus on any illicit drug rather than just fentanyl?
Because it is the focus of fentanyl because of its level of toxicity versus other illicit substances that may not have that same level of toxicity to an individual directly or secondhand. We're not hearing those accounts. We're not seeing that in studies as much as you're seeing concerns with fentanyl just due to its toxicity level. So that is the reason why this is being singled out, because it is that risky of a substance that can result in that potential, physical injury or death to another person. It's that serious risk, right? Like, are you going to be pretty annoyed that you've been exposed to secondhand smoke of a cigarette? Yes. Is it going to cause you serious injury or death right at the outset? No, probably not. Not if it's a passerby. But it's different when you are looking at a substance that does have this level of toxicity.
So can you, when you're presenting this to the full council, is there any way you could also give us level of toxicity with other drugs? Because, so as a normal individual, let's say I'm at a bus stop, this person starts, lighting up, whatever it is, and I'm exposed and I want to call the police. I don't know what I'm calling on, right? So how do we know it's so dangerous or it's fentanyl that, I don't know if my question makes sense, but.
Yes, if someone is exposing someone else at a bus stop, like you just brought up, to any substance, it should be an issue, in my opinion.
And I think that's why I'm probably concerned that it's only this one, so I don't, as a bystander, as a regular person who's potentially exposed to something, I don't know when it is
You wouldn't know when to
for me to
call.
report.
Yeah, you wouldn't know when to call.
No.
I'd say when in doubt, report
Call
it.
911.
That's generally
Interesting.
how
Okay.
people would handle it.
It sounds to me, it would be rare cases, it seems to me, where this would be applicable. I mean, there's a lot of challenges with, somebody actually seeing it, being able to get it to the state toxicology lab, actually getting it back. I mean, that there's challenges with that. However, do you think that this could, and this is more just opinion, I guess, if this ordinance were on the book and people knew that it was on the books, do you think that it could help reduce the likelihood of this behavior?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question, to be honest.
Or maybe the commander.
Yeah,
could,
I'm not a
but,
behavioral, scientist. I'm not sure. I think that that's probably a question for people far more qualified than me. I don't know, Commander, if you. Yeah, I'm not sure whether it would have that effect or not. I think the reason for bringing it forward is, again, due to the toxicity of this substance and its rapid increase of being widely available on the illicit market, widely available in public, and the increase of people smoking fentanyl generally and in public places, to where other people can be exposed to it. That is what was driving bringing this ordinance before you today.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for staff? No. Can we have a motion to present it to the full council?
Yes. I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on the April 19th, 2022 council meeting agenda.
And I second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. It is being forwarded to the full council. I believe that that is the, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments and presentation very much. And I believe that was the last thing on the agenda, correct? Okay. And so, all right, then, our next committee meeting will be May 10th at 5 p.m. right here. Thank you very much, and we shall adjourn the meeting.